What's going on, gardeners? While moving my last year compost pile to the second compost bin compartment, where I store my finished compost, I was thinking, compost is the best amendment for your garden, and composting at home is the best process to get it. But sometimes the composting rules can be overwhelming, especially for a beginner. So how you can make compost at home without stress, or how I call it, the lazy way. I started composting even before I planted my very first plant in my garden. And over the years of making lots and lots of compost, I learned a lot on how to make good quality compost without stress. And today I will share all of it with you. And we'll start with a composting rule that in my opinion can do you more harm than good. The famous composting rule that you need to turn your compost pile. So before we break our backs with turning our compost piles, let's dig into the main content. Composting in nature occurs everywhere, from small cracks in the concrete to the forest floors, where large quantities of leaves are turned into compost every year. Practically everywhere where the organic matter can sit for a little while. And there, no one is turning it. All the nature needs to transform the organic matter into smaller, simple organic and inorganic compounds called compost are some brown materials or some green materials and some water. Then why we are doing it? We can read in practically every tutorial that we can find that turning the compost pile will speed up the composting process. And I agree with this. Turning the compost pile will accelerate the decomposition of organic matter, like stirring sugar in some water will accelerate its dissolution. This acceleration occurs because of few factors. The most important one is because when the composting process starts, it starts in the middle of the compost pile. There is the hottest, and the compost process is the fastest. The further we move from the center, the slowest the process of composting. So in theory you could have the middle of the compost pile completely decomposed, while the outside of the pile still intact. So by turning the compost pile, we're reintroducing the material that once was on the outside to the middle of the compost pile. So the composting process will be more homogeneous. In other words, we'll move the organic matter that was once on the outside and hasn't had the chance yet to decompose to the center of the compost pile, where it will decompose. Another factor that is responsible for the acceleration of composting is oxygen. And by turning our compost pile, we introduce a lot of it back into the pile. To understand why oxygen is so important, we need to know that composting is done in two stages. In the first stage, the organic matter is degraded by microorganisms. And then, in the second phase, the remaining organic matter is completely decomposed by worms. While worms can sustain their decomposition, bacteria can't. Bacteria will decompose organic matter so fast that will produce a lot of heat, and the end will compact the compost pile. A lot. So when the compost pile will compact, the oxygen will be removed from it. But oxygen is an important ingredient in the microbial decomposition. That's why when the oxygen is missing, the microbial decomposition will slow almost to complete stop. By turning the compost pile, we are reintroducing oxygen into the compost pile, thus speeding up the process again. But is it necessary? In my opinion, not. And I think we are sometimes actually doing more harm than good. Here's why. What we'll achieve when we will compost faster? Nothing more than having our compost ready faster. But do we really need that? If you start, let's say, composting now, in March, it's okay to speed it up, so you'll have your compost ready by May, when you're planting in your garden. But what if you start composting in June? What's the point of having fresh compost ready in August, when we are not planting anything in our gardens? And the compost will sit in its pile until the next growing season, leaching its nutrients into the surrounding soil. In my opinion, it's better to compost slowly over the growing season, adding fresh materials to your compost pile slowly over the time and building up your organic mass until the end of the season, and then let the compost slowly finish decomposing over the winter until the next spring when you will need it in your garden. The next composting rule I hear almost everywhere is what to compost and what not to compost, or some sort of variation of this rule, like the green and brown ratio, or some other rule that requires you to have a calculator in your garden if you want to calculate all the parameters correctly. You know what? I throw into my compost pile everything that supposedly we must not compost, like dairy products, grass seeds, meats, bones, diseased plants, and so on. And what do you think is happening? I tried composting with the so-called perfect ratio of browns and greens. I tried to avoid specific materials, like orange peels, so that the compost would be of better quality. And you know what? In the end, all I had with both techniques is nothing more and nothing less than some fresh organic compost. Because I compost slowly, the nature will do its job by killing the weed seeds and disease with heat and decompose all the rest with worms that will eat almost every organic material that I can throw into my compost bin. The only important thing you need to do here, if you want to compost like me, is to add fresh organic waste to your compost pile over the growing season. Add some kitchen waste when you can. Throw in some grass clippings when you mow your garden. Every vegetable cutting that you do needs to roam into your compost pile immediately. And if you do all of this, you don't need to worry what's the ratio of browns and greens in your compost pile. The compost bin will do its magic and will give you some fresh organic compost in the next growing season. But yes, if you throw meats, dairy or other so-called banned materials into your compost pile, you could attract unwanted animals. But if you protect your compost bin with some chicken wire or other barrier that the animals can pass through, you won't have any problems. Now that we cleared what common composting rules you don't need to follow, let's see how to compost the lazy way. After picking a location in your garden that you know it will be hard to grow something in, and that is relatively close to your garden beds, build your first compost bin. It doesn't need to be a compost bin system like mine. You can work totally fine with just one bin compost bin. The important thing is that the compost bin is big, at least 35 cubic feet big. This will ensure that it will get hot easily. Next, throw all organic waste in it. Here, try not to throw the same material in bulk, but mix it in with other materials by adding it in separate layers. This will ensure a good mixture of greens and browns without you worrying and stressing about it. When you have your compost pile ready, leave it be. The nature will do the rest. And when you're adding to it, if you're adding kitchen waste, bury it a little bit so it won't smell. But if you're adding anything else, like grass clippings, cuttings from your plants, or shredded cardboard, just throw it in and act like you don't care. And after your growing season ends, cover your compost pile with some cardboard or whatever you have on hand to protect it over the winter. Now the only thing left is to wait until the next growing season, and if you did it like I show you to, you will collect some fresh organic compost before your growing season starts, so you'll be able to use it in your garden beds. No stress and no hard work. Like I promised, a lazy way of making compost that is stress-free. And now, if you're wondering how I made this beautiful compost bin system, you can click on the video that pops on the screen. If you like the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe so you won't miss other gardening tips and tricks. Happy gardening!